Shout out Sean, man.
Changing the game through real estate, yeah. Changing the game through real estate. I can never wait, got what it takes to got this on my plate. And I got a budget, teach you how to save. Listen to this podcast, you will be amazed. Play this any morning, any night, any day. We're the winning team, we were born.
Guys, welcome back to Changing the Game Through Real Estate podcast. Today we have a friend of mine and also someone who manages all of my properties, Patti Robinson. She's a local here in Hampton Roads, Virginia. If you don't know where that is, it's in the southeast part of Virginia. So if you're not from the area, the most southernmost point right next to North Carolina. She manages tons of properties out here. She's been a lifetime member of TRIG. It's a Tidewater Real Estate Investors Group, and also is a past president of it. She's a founder of the Hampton Roads Landlord Association, and also has been speaking at many different events, including Rent Ready Norfolk tomorrow. I believe it's the 15 biggest mistakes of
top 50. So
top 50.
We're teaching tomorrow. I don't know if you guys watching, you will probably, the date will already have passed, but it's the top 50 mistakes landlords make.
So
yes.
Phenomenal knowledge from you as always, and it's just great to have someone new here.
Thanks, you guys.
After that massive introduction, can you kind of tell us how you got into everything, like why property management?
Yeah, well, ultimately, my husband and I are entrepreneurs, and we've been self-employed pretty much our whole adult lives, and we started with his and hers franchises. We really like the franchise model. Yeah. We're comfortable there. We like a whole bunch. We can do a whole podcast on just that, why we like that. But we started with, we had some Great Clips salons, which we still have, and I was running those, and some Jackson Hewitt offices, and my husband was running those. Well, there's an organization called Multi-Unit Franchise that holds a conference every year, has a publication for people in multiple franchise brands. And I went to one of those conferences back in 2005. Remember what was happening with Blockbuster in 2005?
Chapter 11 bankruptcy?
Yeah, I mean they were getting eaten up, and the franchisees who were there were trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my business? And so they decided, most of them, they were trying to buy the shopping centers they were in, and they were going to convert to commercial real estate and just run their business until it went into the ground, which is what essentially happened. So I came back from that and said, the internet caused us. We need to be looking at our own businesses. The internet can't compete with haircuts, which is one of the reasons we chose that business model. Well, the internet can certainly compete with retail income tax, and it has. So at that point, we started looking for a long-term replacement of that revenue, because that had been our cash cow. That's what helped us do everything else. And we met with a franchise broker and got a list of 12 to 15 different companies, and Homevestors was on the list. I'd never heard of it, but it was in the realm of real estate, and we thought, we really have been thinking that we should diversify into real estate anyways. We have businesses, we have income, we have stocks, but we didn't have any real estate. And Homevestors, you may know that more from the motto is "We buy only houses." Yeah. So we bought that franchise, and based on it meeting the criteria we were looking for, and started, came home from training, bought a house in 20 days, and started, our first one was a flip. First couple were flips. So we started hit the ground running, flipping, wholesaling. We were, high volume real estate investors. And we started in May of 2007 and didn't know anything about real estate. Came home, joined all the investor clubs, started buying houses, at a high volume rate. And went to all the real estate clubs, met flippers, met all the folks, and all of a sudden, they started dropping like flies. Like, they just weren't coming to the meetings anymore. Yeah. Like, what is happening? Well, the market shifted. And we were not in the game before the crash. So we didn't know any better. We thought it was a great time. It was a great time to buy. We just kept buying and buying and buying and buying.
If you knew what you were doing, you could really grow exponentially during the crash.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of people that didn't know what they did, and they lost their shirts completely.
Yeah, we were really lucky. Our timing just put us in a great position. So it didn't take us long to figure out that buying and selling and wholesaling is great. A great way to develop income, but if you want to develop wealth in real estate, you had to start holding. We had to start holding, and we saw that both in huge home investor franchisees that had many hundreds of houses, and we saw it with. I love all the old timers in our market. You know, the old guys and ladies that own a lot. I learned a lot. Have learned and continue to learn a lot from them. So we started holding, and basically, if you guys know Bigger Pockets, the Burr method. We had a short-term lender who we would buy it, fix it up, put a tenant in it, roll it off to local money, out to our local bank, and put permanent finance. We did it over and over and over and over and over. And so that's how we got into real estate. So we got into real estate as investors, not to be property managers. And then an interesting story. I obviously got my license early on just to save us money. Never been an agent who wanted to do traditional real estate. I don't enjoy it much at all.
Yeah.
I like the investment aspect.
That's how all three of us are. Though.
Yeah.
And soon to be.
Yeah.
I'm doing more commercial sales, but
Exactly. Well, it's not traditional though, so it's still different.
Along the way, though, the guy who I learned most of my local investing from, our local attorney, went to jail.
Oh, wow.
And it was earth shattering because he is actually, he's an honest guy. He is totally honest.
So he's innocent.
He's not innocent. He will tell you he's guilty. You should have him come. You should have him come tell the story.
So he's out of jail now.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I mean, but what I learned from that is that if that could happen to him, it could happen to anybody. Because you'll have to have him come on. I'll tell you something and tell a story. He will tell it very differently than I would. I would say he got in trouble for being disorganized in his office.
Yeah.
His story is he's an attorney and he took 100%. He's a great guy, full accountability. But I decided I needed to increase my knowledge and start taking some real estate, more law classes and more finance classes. So I ended up getting my broker's license. Took the classes. So we started our own brokerage. People started asking us to manage. We were managing our own. They started asking us to manage. Other people started asking me to manage the property, and so we got into property management sort of by accident. That's how that happened. Yeah.
So there was no like aha moment, like
No.
It was like, here, manage my properties, and you're like,
no,
sure.
it just kind of happened by accident. So we sort of transitioned, and we had staff running the home investors business. You know, our home acquisition business. We had a staff of people. So we just it was a very easy transition. We just transitioned that staff over. The market started getting more difficult to buy, so our buying slowed down, our management grew, and so it was just a very natural transition for us. The big aha we did have, though, is we went to a couple home investors conferences, and the new franchise that we're in, PMI, Property Management Inc., was there. We saw them a couple times, and just, we had a 9-year-old property management firm. Yeah. The only company we'd ever owned that was not part of a franchise. But then we decided when we saw them the second or third time, the light bulb went on, and we said, if we really want to grow this thing, because we were growing just through accident. We weren't intentionally out marketing the property management business. We just grew through referrals. Yeah, we weren't spending any money marketing. We said if we really wanted to grow it intentionally, we should join a franchise. We liked the business model anyway, so we converted our local brokerage into the Property Management Inc. franchise in 2019.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like when I just met you, actually.
Yeah, probably.
So at that point when you just started, when you decided to transition from the brokerage to the management company, how many doors did you have?
We were managing about 200 doors at that time. A handful of, quarter of them were mine, and the rest were other people's. And we're up to now, in January, so we're 3.5 years in, we're at a little over 350 doors. So we've grown much more quickly. It took us 9 years to get to 150 managed doors. And 3 years, it's much more quick. We're spending a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of money on marketing, but it's more about being intentional about your business.
So what attracted you to PMI? Like you said, you were doing it yourself, and then you saw PMI the second time. What made you train?
Well, we decided that it would be a good idea to franchise for a couple reasons. So there's two components there: why roll into the franchise, and then why PMI. So franchise, we know from experience that franchise models tend to sell for a higher multiple than a local brand, and it's much easier to sell. Long term, we will own our rentals forever. We're generational investors from a real estate standpoint, but I don't necessarily want to be property managing for other people forever.
Yeah.
So this is an asset that we're growing to eventually someday, when we want to move into retirement, to sell it. So in a franchise, we have both bought and sold franchise brands. So 100%, well, with the exception of Homevestors, we sold our Homevestors franchise to someone who was not in the brand, but we have purchased franchises and sold franchises in other brands, in 2 other brands, and 100% of the time, it's always been bought or sold from someone who's already in the brand. So franchise companies have operators that want to grow.
Yeah.
So I know that when we decide to sell, probably another PMI franchisee will be who ends up buying us, is my guess.
Interesting. I never knew that it worked like that.
So,
And then the reason we have Leno PMI, so, I'm a franchise junkie. I love franchise brands.
Yeah.
And I follow that whole business model independently of anything else. So the next thing we did was we had to check out competitors, right? So now we decided we want to be in this model. What brand do we want to go with? And the reason we went with PMI is that they were the only real estate brand that supported a model for both short-term rental, which I think is where, that's the sexy part of real estate right now. That's where everybody wants to be. A long-term commercial and HOAs. And at the time, I thought I really like HOA law, condos and associations. I thought I would focus on that. We ended up not doing that. Our state has the highest level of licensing requirement in that part of real estate than any other. Some states it's not even licensed. Yeah, I mean you have to be actively in the business in HOA or condos longer than you do in regular real estate in order to become the broker level. They don't call it a broker; they call it something else. But to get to that supervisory level, it's kind of crazy. So I would have had to have gone to work for like a select group for 5 years. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So.
did you enjoy the property management side? Because this is what my dad calls property management like the armpit of real estate.
I know.
So what's your take?
I know, and I'm in 2 industries I have been in 2 industries. The Jackson Hewitt income tax also.
Yeah.
People don't really enjoy income taxes in general,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't either. I like that from an operations standpoint, but not as a technical standpoint. But I know I'm weird. I really love property management. Not the owners are. I like to work with the owners, but I really like to solve problems with the tenants. I mean, I'm a fixer.
Yeah.
My first job out of college, I was a troubleshooter for a company. So I traveled around the country and went to locations that were in trouble, and I was the fixer. And that's still what I do. I'm a fixer. I just solve problems all day long. The negative is when you are a property manager, that if I pick up, and you guys can attest to this, if I pick up the phone and call you and you look at the phone and you see that it's me, what's the first thing that goes in your mind?
Something's wrong.
Something's wrong. It's negative. Whether you're a tenant or you're an owner, everybody cringes when we call.
Yeah.
So that's the only negative.
Yeah, I mean, I've only had 3 calls. I'm not saying that they were all bad, but I've never really just hung up like, wow, that was...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost always going to cost you money.
Yeah, usually.
We probably got to focus on more positive calls, but the days are full, so.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about, you had the franchises, the property management, like what do you foresee the next step for you? Do you want to get into...
And we're focused, if you're asking if I'm going to open another brand, personally, my husband and I are not interested in venturing out and opening more brands. We're more looking, and we're older than you, so we're looking more towards, what is our plan for retirement? I would rather simplify. We're focused 100%. We we do have still 13 Great Clip salons.
Oh, wow.
So we have a district manager that runs those full time.
Okay.
And we both work full time in real estate. We're focused on growing the property management division. And we would love to grow our portfolio too. It's just hard to buy right now.
Right.
But we are in buy mode if you guys have houses.
What are you buying?
We'll buy a flip or a rental. So we really run the market up for most anything. I have no buy criteria. We have things that we won't buy. We prefer to be in certain cities.
Yeah.
I don't want 100-year-old houses for rentals or flips. I don't want up-down duplexes. There's certain things that we don't like. There's certain neighborhoods and certain streets I don't like. But we're pretty open.
So a lot of people are like, big question is like, should I buy, should I not buy? Like you say you're buy. Like, what's your opinion on the housing market as a whole right now?
It's tough. I can't believe the numbers I'm seeing come through my desk of properties clients are buying. I think people are just paying insane money.
I agree. We have this
They're
conversation
buying
all
just
the
to
time.
buy, and I won't do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we're going to get back to the 2008, 2009, 2010 prices. We're never going to see those days again. But it'd be nice to meet the 1% rule. To just meet the 1% rule.
Good luck.
But that said, everybody has a different strategy, and I like to know that. And I always like to know what's your strategy. I've got a guy who is in his 70s, who has his child is a doctor who lives in this market, so he wanted to retire here. He owned rental property in Phoenix, and he 1031 exchanged everything he had in Phoenix here. So his goal was like, my goal is I want a strong return for my cash investment, right?
Yeah.
I'm paying based on my purchase plus repair to rent ratio. Well, his goal is to minimize his taxes, and he only had 60 days to identify a property once it's sold. His goal is to preserve his asset because he knows he's going to be passing them on to his heirs. So his first two properties he bought were brand new construction, right? Not too far. In Chesapeake, he wanted Great Bridge, new construction, specific school zone. So we were spending over $400,000 for houses that at the time we were renting for $2,800, $2,900. Those numbers would never work for me. I wouldn't buy those numbers. But for him, it made total sense because he bought brand new construction that came with a builder's warranty. He's in the best school district, one of the best school districts in our market. So he's going to have good growth in terms of his appreciation, and he avoided paying tax on his capital gain. So it made total sense for him. So everybody has their own goal, their own benefit to what they're trying to do.
So what about, like, we have this conversation, so how because I know the housing market was going crazy the last couple of years, but a lot of people didn't realize the rental market was even worse. So where do you see like rents going in the next?
Yeah, the rental
couple
market
years?
is still crazy. And in our market, I don't know what's happening across the country, but in our market in the last 2 weeks, we've seen a major shift in retail sales. We've seen a lot of new listings. We've seen a lot of price reductions. We've seen a much lower rate of showings. A lot less
rentals?
people. No, in the sales market.
Oh, okay, the sales.
People are now asking for seller assist in closing costs, or now asking for inspections. Just the market has shifted in the last 2 weeks. But I don't foresee that happening in the rental market ever, really, because now we're not talking there's two different pockets in the apartment community. The lower income multi-units. We're not seeing as much appreciation in those, and because there aren't as many shortages, because those properties did flip, and you guys have been looking at a lot of them, but they're flipping from investor to investor, so they're not going off the market. Whereas in the single family house market, most of those sales that happened ended up being sold to an owner occupant. So in the when you get up to the B neighborhoods, even the C's. A lot of those houses came out of the rental market. So we're seeing a huge inflation in rents. The higher the price point, the higher of an inflation we've gotten in rents. We are seeing growth in all of the rental categories, but it's much lower appreciation in the lower priced properties.
How about for higher price, say like a B class property for apartments? Say it's a 50-unit apartment complex. Is that going to see appreciation as much as you would with your single families?
It will some, but there's so much competition there. There's so many new construction builds. The problem is the older complexes are competing with brand new construction right now in the apartment arena. So I find it's a more competitive spot to be in the rental arena.
Okay. So you wouldn't say higher vacancy or something like that, would you? Or is it just the price that's not moving, but the vacancy is staying the same?
I haven't particularly measured vacancies in apartment complexes. I don't work in that huge complex arena to know that exact number. But I mean, it is a younger demographic. I mean, there's demand, but you've just got to compete with the new construction that's out there that's similar to you. And it's hard sometimes to compete with amenities. A lot of people are looking at these older complexes and they want to add value and raise the rents. And lots of times they're not in the neighborhood that's really going to happen. I mean, they think it will, but you've got to look, and especially if you're not local, you've got to know what's going on in the neighborhood. If you've got a lot of foot traffic on the street, a lot of trash in front of the property, I mean, I'm not talking people, I'm talking physical garbage, on the street. You know, I mean, you've got to look at, I like to monitor where the shootings are. You know, you've got to know where the gang and the drug activity is.
Right.
And if
Crime
you're-
activity.
Right. If you're crime is different than shootings
Right.
because most shootings are done by gang members and drug dealers who are never convicted.
Right.
So they don't show up in the crime stats.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
You need to just, because I know that we know this, but you sent me a text thread once. So you actually, explain that a little bit.
I haven't done it for this calendar year. Last calendar year, I just logged every shooting. You know, I mean, I don't know if every market has this, but in our market we have Facebook groups for each city of people that, and I don't do this, but there's people who are really bored and they love listening to the scanner. So they listen to the police scanner all day and they just log what happens. All the activities, just a log. And so I just a couple times a week go in and look at those, and I logged the shootings. And it's surprising. I scared myself a little bit on Saturday because shootings are happening. They used to happen after high school got out in the evening hours, when it was approaching dark. And so the rule for my office used to be that we didn't go into the more dangerous neighborhoods after 3 o'clock. But 4 weeks ago, in Portsmouth, a neighborhood where I have a lot of rentals we manage, on a Friday at 9:30, there was a shooting. So this Saturday, I was in the neighborhood for a couple hours, and I thought to myself, am I really this stupid to be doing this? It was the middle of a Saturday.
Bring a friend.
And I was concerned.
Shield.
That night there was a shooting. It didn't happen during the day; it happened that night. But on a corner where I was, so
You never know what.
So how can people determine, like, let's say if someone's not from the market, right, and they want to come analyze the market, how can they determine, like, what's a good area, what's not a bad area? Like,
and that's a good question because people always ask. Tenants always ask, is this a good area? And as a licensed agent, investors we can steer to neighborhoods, but for anyone who's going to live in a home, it would be a fair housing violation. We can't steer people to or from any particular neighborhood. So I try to send people to third parties. Send them to shootings aren't documented, so all we have is crime stats. Right. So you can start with crime stats, and then talking to the local police officer. The police officers will tell you a lot. Yeah. Off the market, off the record. So usually there's a police officer in most areas assigned to each neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And if you can get that police officer on the phone, they'll give you a lot of information.
What's the best way to reach out to them? Like, a lot of them are on social media.
Right. I mean, you have to. Usually that's published someplace. So
call your local department.
You can call your local department. Like in Norfolk, Virginia, for instance, that person they call it a community relations officer is the name of the police officer position. And that name and phone number is published right on the Norfolk website, on the real estate website, Norfolk Air. So I do too.
Yeah.
So much information.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is, you need to look that up.
If you're local, yeah. And Hampton has a good one. So, but just calling and asking.
What about like I always tell people, well, maybe not always tell people, but to drive the neighborhoods like multiple times in a day, because that gives you like overall sense of the environment.
Yep. And if a tenant prospect says, is this a good neighborhood? I say, I can't steer you to or from a neighborhood, but I can give you permission to go sit on my porch between 3 and 7 o'clock tonight.
Yeah.
Go sit on my porch and you evaluate the neighborhood for yourself.
Yeah, because when you live there, I mean, that's going to be multiple times. You're going to have to.
You're stuck there at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
It's true. We do get stuck sometimes. Talking about people getting stuck, how's evictions going now? What's the update with that?
Well, in Virginia, we have an eviction moratorium that is still in place until the end of June. Our grant money has lasted longer than most states, but it's about dried up. So tenants can no longer submit applications.
So for those that don't know what the moratorium is, we explain that.
Yeah, a moratorium. I think pretty much every state had a moratorium where the government said that we, as landlords, may not evict anyone based on financial reasons of unpaid rent. It was a response to COVID, and most of the states the moratoriums have already expired. In Virginia, we were blessed with a long one, so ours is until June 30th. It doesn't mean that we haven't been able to do evictions. We have. We've been able to move forward with all unlawful detainer cases for everything other than financial. Let's say a holdover, a tenant, we gave them a non-renewal notice and they didn't leave, or they had extra occupants in the house, or anything not related to money, we've still been able to get people moved out on. Even financial, the law says that our state had to approve the grant in 45 days, so we should have been able to move forward even on those. But our judges were not real cooperative. I just had a judge last week tell me, I have one that we've been waiting months and months and months on. And, I said, but Your Honor, it's been way more than 45 days. He says, I know, I realize that. He said, I'm allowed to ignore that, and so I'm going to.
So what's the process like? Let's say they stop paying rent, or there's another reason. What's the process? Do you have to give them notice?
Mm-hmm.
What's the steps?
Yeah, and pretty much both states have a similar process. So you almost always have to give the tenant some notice of default, and the state determines how many days notice that is to be. In Virginia, part of their COVID response was to extend our required notification date. So we had historically always been a 5-day notice period, meaning we send you a notice that says you're out of compliance in your lease. You have 5 days to get in compliance, or we have the right to file an unlawful detainer on you. And so that went to 14 days. July 1st, it's going back to 5, so we got a little benefit in the landlord's favor. So that means that's a notice period, though. They have that opportunity to cure it, and then we can't file an unlawful detainer until after that period ends.
So I know we were looking at some multifamilies, and it said it was $50,000 of unpaid rent.
Yeah.
So how does you can't use, there anything you can do for that, or you just?
Well, you're probably not going to collect on them. The goal would be to, in a situation like that, mitigate your losses. So my strategy would be to go in, do an analysis, a tenant by tenant analysis. In some cases, you may have people who can pay, but just haven't been paying because they weren't being forced to.
Yeah.
They had no repercussions. I see that a lot. Lots of times we're able to, not lots of times, but sometimes we're able to turn a tenant situation around. So I would prioritize based on the ones that are total deadbeats, or there's no way they're going to be able to pay, and focus on those first rather than kicking everybody out at once. It's better to collect some income than no income when you're not going to have the ability to rehab 50 units all at the same time. So that would be my strategy, to prioritize them.
Do you feel like a lot of people are just taking advantage of the system?
100%.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because how can you tell if you've got Bob renting this house for $1,500 a month, and due to the moratorium, he's like, I'm not paying my rent anymore, but yet he's still collecting a paycheck weekly. How do you prove that?
Perfect. I'll give you 2 examples. One, we had a tenant we moved into a property who made $6,500 a month. We know for sure he made $6,500 a month because we use a third-party income validator who validates that money flowed through a bank account. All right. So he paid rent the first month, didn't pay rent the second month, and applied for our state grant loan, the COVID response grant loans. We call it RRP. Well, at that time, the system we were using was the old system, and we could get a copy of their application. So I saw his application. On his application, I know he makes $6,500 a month. He told them he only made $2,500 a month. He said he didn't have a drop in income. He didn't have an increase in medical expenses, and yet he qualified because he lied about his income. I wrote to the administrator of the program. I wrote to our state attorney general's fraud department, shared all this information. Not only did none of that matter, he got approved for the loan. Oh, they sent his check to him. He did give it to us, but they didn't even send it to us. They sent it to him. It gets worse. He applied again. So they paid, I don't know, 4 months or something of his rent that he had the ability to pay.
Is that fraud though?
It is 100% fraud, but the state didn't care. So he applied again. Somehow they got us on the phone. I don't remember why we were on the phone. And I pointed out to them, this is, he does not qualify. He's lied on his application. In spite of that, even verbally telling them, he still got a second check. I've got another one, a tenant who's been in our properties for a long, long time, who really did have a loss of income due to COVID. She and her kid both got sick. She was out of work for like 2 weeks. She happens to work for one of my vendors. And she called. She was going to go on a payment plan. I said, there is money available for you in this situation. Why don't you apply for the grant? She said, okay, I only need it for 1 month. She went right back to work. I know that because she's one of my vendors. Yeah. And so she's like $5,000 in right now. She owes this landlord. Because the grant folks said she could apply for more than just the 1 month. She did, and she didn't pay. And now she's arguing that she shouldn't even have to pay late fees. No, the poor owner. This is a military owner who potentially has to pay late fees to his mortgage company. He can't afford to be $5,000 in the hole. It's totally unfair. So people, she also had the ability to pay. She just didn't because they told her, because the people in the state told her she didn't have to.
Question on, so if you start picking up portfolios, like let's say we get a 50 unit and we pick it up and it's from a different management agency, how do you go about transitioning those tenants from them to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. And most people think it's best to do that on the first of the month. It's really not. It's really best to do right after first of the month because it does take time to notify tenants. So we would rather start a management agreement in a situation like that right after the old property manager has collected rents, and that gives us the majority of a month to, we've got to build, leases, buildings, people in the software. We have to build it all in software. And then we have to physically reach all the tenants and tell them, how do you pay rent? How do you submit maintenance requests? All that. So generally right after the first of the month is the best time to do that. And then we just, we get the contact information. We really try to take the work off the owner and we go to the property manager. Usually we're able to be.
That was my next question. Is how is that?
Well, I have one right now.
Y'all are fired. I'm taking it.
I have one going on right now. It's a local another local agent who's moving her 6 properties over to us, and the other property manager reached out to me and said, "Are you available Friday at 11 o'clock to talk about this turnover?" I mean, I had asked her in an email previous, and I said, "That'd be great." I said, "We probably don't need to talk. You probably could email me this stuff, but if you want to talk, that's fine." Well, she ghosted me.
She did it on purpose.
Oh my gosh!
And I wait until like 5 after I don't get a phone call. I go to her email. There's no email anyplace in her. There's no phone number in her email.
She looked at the crime rate. She's like, "Hey, you want to meet me here at this time?"
Yeah, I mean we're supposed to talk on the phone. So I call the brokerage and leave a message. No call back. So I don't know.
Is she in the hospital or she's being really unprofessional?
Yeah. Yeah, well, she's not licensed. I mean, it's an employee in the office. So it's not a licensed person, but yeah.
So, when you do your background checks for a tenant, what's your process? Like, it's like, of course, like, is it kind of like the same thing with a house? Like, what's your?
This is a good question because this is where a lot of self-managed agents and all property managers, they're not. It's not created equal. Most people think when they buy screening software, they hit a button and they wait until the answer comes back and it says approved or disapproved, and they just do whatever it says. And that's crazy because guess what? People lie.
Oh yeah.
People lie. And we're going to get the credit. I can rely on that push of a button for the credit because although I'll mention you can cheat on the credit too a little bit. But people right now there are sources readily available where you can buy pay stubs, employment verification, bank statements. And I just learned of a new one a couple weeks ago. I didn't even know this was a thing. But people are renting trade lines. They're renting trade lines. So what that means is if I have bad credit, I say, hey, Tyler, dude, I'm applying to buy I need a new Mercedes, dude.
Yeah.
I need it. But my credit's terrible. Can you put me on your American Express just for like the next 30 days while I got this application through? And you put me on your credit. It influences my score, raises my score. The credit bureaus are figuring it out and they are watching for it and eliminating it. But if I have a window of time that it's going to help my credit score, and they're calling that buying and renting trade lines. It's very similar to what we've seen before with straw buying in the house buying market, where I go to you and I say, hey, I can't get a loan. I really want this house. Will you help me out? Just put the mortgage in your name. I promise I'll pay it. Well, that's against law. People go to jail for that. Yeah. Well, the same thing is happening now in the rental arena with people renting and buying trade lines. And there's brokers for it. There are brokers for this. So people are brokering this. So they're going out, they're paying you some, they're keeping a cut. It's insane. So you really have to be careful. We rely on, we have specific criteria. We put it in every one of our ads. So my goal is that nobody applies who doesn't meet criteria. We don't want to take people's application fee money. I mean, we're not in the business of turning application fees. We really want you to screen yourself out if you don't apply. So they have to have certain income. We do check credit. I'm not personally, my company doesn't look for a specific credit score. We're looking for threats to a person's income. So there are certain creditors that are notorious for garnishing wages. Furniture companies, car companies, credit card companies, landlords. If you owe money to any of those consumer type companies, utility companies, your wages will be garnished. It's just a matter of time. They will track you down and they will find you. We don't worry so much about medical and student loans. I have seen student loans in my employer world. I have seen garnishments for student loans, but it's very, very unusual. So we generally don't worry about those. For criminal, our criteria is we don't want to see any crimes against people or crimes against property in the last 7 years, and no drug distribution or drug manufacturing charges. So we tell people this up front. And then we validate their income. We use a third-party company that validates their income, and we tell people this up front. I mean, I pay for it. It comes out of the application fee, but they have to go through the process of it basically links their bank accounts or wherever their money flows through, and it validates their reoccurring income and non-reoccurring income so that we can analyze over the last, it gives us in 30 days, 90 days, and a year what their income is. And then we look at their pay information to see if it makes sense. Does your, we get a lot of, I almost don't want to tell people are on the fake pay stubs because, I never tell the applicant how I know they're fake or that I know they're fake because they get better and better. I don't want to tell them what they're doing wrong. But if I see, someone that is a CNA, a lot of our tenants are CNAs. They work for like a home health care company and they're going in and helping elderly, that kind of thing. If they're working 90 hours in a 2-week payroll period and they don't have any overtime on their paycheck, I know that there's a problem. Either your employer is breaking the law, in which case you have an unscrupulous employer, or you made these numbers up. I mean, usually when we identify it as a fake pay stub, usually their earnings come in right at what our published rent or public income criteria is. I even had somebody, this is great. I had a phone call a couple weeks ago, and this woman says, I said, I usually just answer the phone, my name, because it's my cell phone. And she said, "Oh, I think I might be calling the wrong place." I said, "Well, who are you looking for?" She says, "Well, I need a pay stub for an income verification." I'm like, I said, "I'm confused. Are you?" I thought, well, maybe she's one of my Great Clips employees looking for W-2. So maybe she just has her words wrong. I said, well, who do you work for? She said, no, I'm short on my income and I need another pay stub. Somehow,
she called the wrong number.
Right, how she got my number, I have no idea. Because I have a blog I'm working on applicant fraud, but I haven't published it yet. I don't know how in the world she got my number. But yeah, she thought I could just make her pay because she was a little bit short. She just needed a little bit more to meet the minimum.
Dang, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So is it? That seems like so much, like such a job to.
The other thing we do, I didn't even finish. We also manually go through the court records. I don't know why, but something about the way our Virginia court records feed out. All the credit and court records feed through a system called LexisNexis. It's just a big, huge financial database. The way our court records read, they don't always funnel correctly. So sometimes on a screening report, we might see that someone has a judgment and it's $3,000, but if I go to the court website, it will say it's been satisfied. Last week I had one that was my screening said it was satisfied. I went out to the court record, exact same case number, it was not satisfied. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe the screening when it comes to that. We manually check the court records. And the screening companies only look for landlord-tenant data, all of them. No matter who you use, that's all they look for. I don't want to just know about landlord-tenant. I want to know about all consumer judgments because, again, if the judgments are not reported to the credit bureaus anymore, many years ago that became illegal because when you take somebody to court, you don't usually report their social security number. So there's too much confusion as to whether or not it's the same person. So just because a company got a judgment does not mean it's going to be reflected in the credit report. So if, let's say, at our market, Grand Furniture is a big furniture company that goes after people. Auto Connection is a car company that goes after people if you owe them money. If I see a judgment against against my applicant from one of those guys, then I'm gonna, and it's not satisfied, I'm gonna deny it. If I see that it's satisfied, but the person had to garnish their wages 3 times in order to get it satisfied, that to me is also an indication that they did not pay their debt voluntarily. Right. So, if someone gets a judgment, everybody gets in trouble once in a while. Nobody's things happen in life. So, but if somebody gets in trouble and they pay their debt voluntarily, to me, that's a sign of good character. I don't hold it against them because if they get in trouble, that means they're going to treat me the same way. Mm-hmm. But if they think it's okay to walk away from that creditor and not pay them, they're going to do the same thing to me or my landlord.
So there's so much to do in the screening process. Like, how is there a way to like let's say someone is bold enough after hearing all that stuff that they want to self-manage themselves. Is there a way for them like you would recommend that here's the process?
Well, I mean, if they're in Hampton Roads, they could hire us just to do professional tenant placement. Mm-hmm. That's a service that we offer. We will do for people who want to manage on their own. We do professional tenant placement. So we handle everything from pictures, video, pre-screening, showings, all those screenings. We put them in a lease, their lease or our lease, whichever they prefer, and then we pass it back to them. So, I mean, that's something people can do. Yeah. Just be really diligent. They have to, we teach, join your local investor club, your local landlord clubs, and talk to people about what they're seeing. The best data out there is what's live going on in the field right now. And so by hanging out with other landlords, I learn my best tips from other landlords. Yeah. You want to, and the best mistakes to learn from are those made by other people. Yeah. So you want to, by talking to other people, there's no reason for me to make a mistake when I've already learned because you did it. Exactly. Right. So we can all help rise the level.
There's so many people out there that self-manage their properties, and you're teaching a class on this tomorrow of the top 50 mistakes that landlords make. What would you say, you don't have to go into all of them, but the top 5 biggest problems that self-managed landlords do?
Your class will air before this episode.
Right, yeah. Big mistakes. I mentioned one that as we were getting ready today for military folks at House Hack in our area. A lot of military people who are single, especially, going to buy a house on the House Hack. Not having your lease expiration dates for your room renters coordinated is a big mistake. I'm not actually covering this tomorrow, but so when I have one right now. I have a really nice military lady. She just moved out a couple weeks ago. She has one tenant that's moving out at the end of this month, and another one that her lease doesn't expire until the end of October. But she's only renting one room, so for she has a whole house in Virginia Beach, so she's only going to get $700 of income for the next 5 months because she didn't coordinate her lease dates. So she either could have put them on 30-day leases, or coordinated the lease expirations with her own orders so that she would have had better options at the end of her lease. That's one. Not taking co-signers who are out of the area is one. I'm very hesitant to take a co-signer anyways, and I'll only take one that's local because it's too hard to serve them. You know, we have to, in order to take someone to court and get a judgment, we have to serve them. So if they live in Alaska, my local attorney isn't going to have a process server in Alaska.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to cost more to do that. It's going to be hard. It's going to take me longer. So, you know, that's one. There's lots. Take the class.
Yeah. So, what about like you don't have to give names. Like, what's some of the worst stories that you've experienced as a property manager? Like, you don't have to give names, but some of the stories that have kind of happened and some things you learned. Yeah, some things you learned from those mistakes and situations.
I mean, not screening people. I mean, a lot of houses we take over, usually, a lot of times, there's a tenant in trouble. You know, we take over situations that are sticky, that a tenant that's not paying. And the hardest situations are when it's a relative or somebody you know. Again, with military, with roommates, the roommates are great when the military member's in town. I promise you it's a different story after the military member leaves. Yeah. For some reason, the homeowner always leaves before the roommates. I don't know why that is. And usually, especially if it's enlisted people who are, then when they leave, they're going onto a ship. Well, guess what? They can't take all that stuff they've accumulated to the ship. So it gets left in the house. So, I mean, those are really sticky situations that just a little bit of upfront knowledge of what to do would help eliminate that in the end. The big mistakes? Is that what
it could be big mistakes, like crazy stories. That's what, I'm
Oh.
sure you got plenty of. I just want to hear a couple of them.
Probably well, I'll tell you one we just had. We have an owner who is an elderly woman who lives out of state, who owns a bunch of property in Virginia Beach. And she's been self-managing for years, and has been doing fine. Her handyman passed away in January, and the city has been on her because she had a tarp on the roof for a zoning violation. And one of the workers that worked for her contractor who died said, "Oh, I can help you with this. I'm a contractor. I'm just starting and he started a business in January. It's not licensed as a contracting company, but he does have a state registration for business, contracting business. Just send me $7,000 and I'll finish his job for you." And then he says, "I really, really, really like this townhouse. How about if I move in it and I'll do the labor for free in exchange for the deposit and first month's rent?" And they never put anything in writing, and he never paid her a dime. And I ended up getting involved because she couldn't get the roof because she had this deadbeat drug addict liar squatting in her house. So
and didn't even fix it.
He did lay floors.
Not the
but
roof though.
He put in a really fancy faucet like the one that's in here. But guess what? He took it with him.
Oh my god.
He took it with him.
Wow.
Yeah.
We were at a conference a couple weeks ago, and the guy was saying, like, so when someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, trust me, just shake my hand and trust me," he said, what you should say, he said, "I trust you, but I don't trust your wife's attorney." He said that has made him so much money because they put you on the spot and not to trust you. And every time he says this, they're like, "Oh, well, dang."
Right.
They have something for that.
It's a business relationship. Yeah.
So that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So So someone who's not in Virginia, and we're lucky right now because we have you. If they wanted to go like vet a property manager, what's some questions they should ask on vetting property manager? Like who's a good one, who's a bad one?
I would rely on Google reviews. I think they're pretty accurate. I monitor my competitors' Google reviews, and I can tell you that some of them you can tell are buying them. I mean, but that's obvious. Oh yeah, people buy Google reviews. Yeah, people manipulate all kinds of things. But it's pretty easy to see. I mean, when you read them, it's pretty easy to see that. But you get a good flavor for the culture of a company. I think it really comes. I can tell from, at least in my competitors, I think they're pretty spot on. So I would look at that. I don't know if they can tell you how many owners they're losing. I know we fire way more owners than leave.
You got two really bad ones here.
You guys are good ones, yeah. But if an owner is unwilling, I have one right now who we have contractors who have worked on their houses, they're a bunch, and they say, "Oh, we're cash strapped. We can't pay. We have to take it out of rents." Well, I mean, from the time they told me this to the time rents, even if they're paid on the first, they don't clear on the first. We can't use that money until it clears. Like, that's 3 weeks. I can't make my contractor wait 3 weeks.
Right.
You know, we have good contractors because we promise we'll pay them in a 1 week turnaround. So owners who are unwilling, or sometimes it's sad, unable to keep their houses habitable, we have to let them go, because I can't put my license in jeopardy by having being out of compliance with the law.
So I talk to a bunch of multifamily funds all the time. They always project, rent's going to go up 8% this year, 10% next year, and crazy amount of numbers. Me and we always have this conversation. It's like, does their income even match that amount of like inflation? Because you talk about like a third of their income.
Right.
Would that even be realistic expectations? Like, how would they be able to afford that stuff?
I mean, with inflation, generally incomes go up too.
So do you see like rents going up and incomes going up?
Right now we're increasing rents at minimum of $100 across the board.
Every year over year?
It depends. If they sometimes we'll put somebody in a multi-year lease. Mm-hmm. And when we're doing renewals, we sometimes, depending on the house and depending on the tenant, the stronger the tenant is, the longer we want them to stay. So if we're going to offer multiple options, we reach out to the owner and say, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this or this or this," and have you chime in. But you know, the longer the lease we get, the lower the rent we'll lock in.
Yeah.
You know, but it's hard when you already. If we lock somebody in a rent amount that's really, really high this year, we're not going to get that much of an increase next year. I mean, we already have them at top of the market.
Yeah.
We're getting a much bigger spread on increases when a tenant moves out and we're putting a new tenant in. Then we can really take advantage of that market jump. I mean, it's my goal for every one of our owners is to have the longest run of uninterrupted rent payments possible. And if we sacrifice a little bit of rent, you know, because we're doing a renewal, we can't renew these guys at regular market rate. They just won't stay. So we want to renew them high enough so that we get some advantage of the cash flow, but keep it below market rent so that they know they can't go anyplace else. The goal, we don't want to turn the unit. It costs, no matter what, it costs the owner money to turn a unit.
Agreed.
So.
But I remember, like, I can only talk about my experience, but like it was like we listed one of our properties, and it was like first day 74 applicants, but there were only like 10 that qualified. You feel like so we use a really cool company. It's called Tenant, and there's several of them similar to this. They handle our leasing process, and what I love data, and you guys do too. They provide us with a lot of data so that we can make smart decisions in the leasing process. So. And what you're referring to is it tells us, we get a report that says how many inquiries we've gotten. Of those inquiries, how many of the people even meet the published criteria? And it's just by word of mouth. I mean, just because they say they did doesn't mean they really did. But about 50% of the people who inquire don't even meet the criteria. Yeah. And some of that 50% are lying, right? We know that. So that means less than 50% of the people who inquire even meet the criteria. And then of those, how many
how many scheduled showing, and then of those, how many actually show up, and what kind of feedback do we get. So we know that I like to wait before I make judgment through 2 weekends. So we put a house on the market and make it through 2 weekends, and then I like to look at, we know if we're not getting enough inquiries, if we're not getting a lot of inquiries, we're priced too high. If we're getting inquiries and people are going to see it and we're not getting applications, then we know we have a problem with either the facility or the neighborhood. I mean, one of the issues we have is that our marketing looks really pretty. I mean, our pictures are really, really nice, and our neighborhoods don't always match the prettiness of our pictures. You know, and we use I think wide angle lens is good. You know, so it makes the rooms look bigger. Well, especially your house in particular. It's tiny. The rooms are really, really tiny, but it looks really big in the picture. So, I mean, that's a little bit of a drawback that, but I'd rather the pictures look pretty and get people in there.
You might get somebody that wouldn't necessarily go originally, but falls in love with it.
We have great tenants in that property. Yeah.
Let's keep them there.
Yeah. It's 21st Street.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I really liked to your company compared to a lot of the property managers is I feel like a lot of the property managers I've talked to, it's like you're working with one person and then they have like 100 properties. It's almost impossible for that one property manager to manage 100 properties. But like yours is you run it more like a company. It's like more you utilize technology a lot.
Yeah, and that's a really good observation because there's two ways to organize a property management company. And one way is as what you first described, one agent is responsible for all the aspects of the properties they manage. But you think about, you guys, most of you are real estate agents, as I am. What's the skill set of a real estate agent? Versus the tasks to manage a property. To manage a property, we're doing accounting, we're doing contracts and leases, highly detailed. We're doing marketing and sales, and an agent is really good at marketing and sales. Yeah. How good is and contracting, and how good is an agent going to be at the details? Maybe they do contracts, so they'll be okay at that, but collections and ledgers and accounting and maintenance supervision. One individual probably isn't going to be at all those things. So the other way, once any property management company gets to any size, they generally go into a task-based function. Yeah. So it allows you to hire people that have this right skill set for the task. So we do actually personality profile to, like for our office manager, we don't need her to be high-end social skills, and we want her to have a very high attention to detail, and she does. Our maintenance person, my husband oversees our maintenance. We flip houses. He's got a background in that. Yeah. We have a leasing agent who handles sales. We have a bookkeeping team that does the books. So we base it on task, which I think in the long run is better. And we do rely heavily on technology. Every company that wants to grow has to.
And because I've talked to multiple property managers, they said like one person can only if it's one person like that, can only usually manage 30. Actually,
I don't know that the number's ever been that low. I think the rule of thumb used to be 70. Now it's gone higher than that.
Yeah, now I've seen them do almost 100 and something, and I was like, I don't see that any possible way that one person can do if they're doing drive-bys and that you have to be your full-time job or something like that. Yeah. So. Yeah. By the way, I don't know if you do podcasts, but you're amazing at it.
Thank you.
So it's been great. I've loved this. I love this episode, and I've learned a lot. So
I love it too.
I've learned a ton.
Yeah. You guys are amazing. Go buy some more houses.
Yeah.
We're trying.
Buildings.
Buildings.
Which we're going to right after the center.